The proximity of Zion Adar to Parshas Tetzaveh teaches us about the power of a tzadik even after the tzadik has left this world physically, how in fact their essence remains connected with us even after their presence is not felt as openly. Zion Adar is Yom B'tiras Moshe Rabbeinu, the 7th of Adar, which is the day of the passing of Moshe Rabbeinu. Chol b'Reb Hashanim b'smichus Parshas Tetzaveh. Most years coincides with the week of Parshas Tetzaveh. Therefore, there are Sfarim that say that there's a link hinted at in this week's parasha to the idea of Moshe passing. And what's that link? Parshas Tetzaveh, a parasha yichida b'Torah. Parshas Tetzaveh is the only parasha in the Torah, Misha Noilad Moshe, Va'ad Mishnah Torah, from when Moshe Rabbeinu is born until Mishnah Torah, Sheba Lo Nizkar Shmo Moshe, where Moshe Rabbeinu's name is not mentioned. That indicates an absence of Moshe, and that links to the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu passes away. Now, V'lechereinu Mechuva really does not seem to be clear, because Halorak Hashem Moshe Lo Nizkar B'Mefurish B'Parshas Tetzaveh. Yes, Moshe's name is not mentioned in the parasha, but that's it. It's just his name, Moshe. But there are so many parts of the parasha that speak about Moshe and relate to Moshe, just not with his name. Starting with the beginning of the parasha, which is Ve'ata Moshe, you, Moshe Tetzaveh, which is the beginning of the parasha. So it's speaking directly about Moshe. And throughout the parasha, there are many instructions directed at Moshe, to Moshe. How do you tell me his absence? Yes, his name is not there, but he's not absent. V'oid, not only that. Let's assume that Moshe is not mentioned in the parasha. Is not that the exact opposite theme of what it means when a tzadik is nistalek? Because when a tzadik leaves this world, the physical leaving of the tzadik does not undermine his name or his impact. We remember his name forever, and we remember his actions and his impact forever. It's only his body that's left the world. How could you suggest that the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu passes away on Zayin Adar is nirmezes dafkal yedei askar shmoi, is remembered or mentioned in the Torah, alluded to by the fact that his name is not mentioned? The one thing that a tzaddik will always have is his name, and what we associate with that name. Not only that, Yasser al-Kain, a step deeper than that, the instructions in Parshas Tetzaveh to Moshe are said in the second person. Tetzaveh, you instruct. Ve'asisa, and you should make. Ve'lokachta, and you should take. Etc. And that's completely different to most places in Torah. Most places where Moshe is mentioned by name, which includes V'smichus the Parshas Mishpatim, just close to our parasha, which is the end of Parshas Mishpatim, right? Vel Moshe Omar Alei El Hashem, and to Moshe he was told to go after Hashem. It's in third person, as if Moshe is not there. They're telling the story about Moshe. Here we're speaking directly to Moshe. Ve'ato, and you, Tetzaveh, you should instruct. Ve'lokachta, ve'asisa. So you're telling me that Moshe is less noticeable in this parasha where we're speaking to him directly, than in other parashas where we speak about him in the third person? The explanation is perhaps we've misunderstood what it means to have your name mentioned and what it means for a tzadik to leave this world. We know from the Zohar, because the Alter Rebbe tells it to us in Tanya, tzaddik espata, a tzadik who passes away, is accessible or found in all of the worlds, yater mi bechayohi, even more than when he was alive. Meaning, that the tzaddik after he passes is accessible or found, present in all worlds, including our physical one, yoiser mi bechayov, more than he was present while he was physically alive. Now what does that mean? When we say that he's more present than during his life, it's not like some kind of anecdotal access to the tzaddik. It is fundamentally, exponentially more presence than while he was alive. As the Alter Rebbe explains to us, there are two factors. Number one, as long as the tzaddik was living in human form, the real life and vibrance of the tzaddik, which the Alter Rebbe explains is all about Torah, mitzvahs, and connection to Hashem, was limited to the structure and bounds of the physical body. Which means that we who had a relationship with the tzaddik could only access a ray, a glimmer, a shimmer of his true greatness. Now, of course, for us, that's going to be incredibly powerful and inspiring, but compared to what the tzaddik has to offer, it's nominal. Whereas the real life force of the tzaddik, once the tzaddik passes away, that life force is no longer contained and restricted by the vessel of the human body. Therefore, it is possible for us to be able to connect to the essence of the tzaddik after the tzaddik passes away. That means that there's far greater presence, exponentially greater presence of the tzaddik now than while the tzaddik is physically alive. That's number one. Number two, base. What does it mean? What does it mean that a tzaddik passes away? It means his neshama is being elevated and reconnected to the source from where it came. Which means that now the tzaddik is in a radically elevated position, linked in to his source, and that is nimtzas eshtachach halamata available to us here down below. So previously we could only access the tzaddik in the level of neshama that was present in the world at that time. Now the tzaddik is in touch with the deepest level of his neshama, and that's available to us. V'nimtza, which means stalkusim shel tzaddikim, that the passing of tzaddikim shnei ketzaves yeshba has two extreme paradoxical realities. Because on the one hand is stalkus shel tzaddikim begashmius, the fact that the tzaddik physically leaves our world, paradoxically means that the tzaddik is being dramatically elevated spiritually. He is elevated and then elevated further all the way to his original source, to his essence, which is the dimension of the tzaddik that is beyond anything that could ever be shared with us while he was present. That's why we don't see the tzaddik. Not because the tzaddik has become absent, but because the tzaddik has keyed into his essence, and the essence is beyond anything we could perceive or access. On the one hand. Yet on the other hand, despite the fact that the tzaddik has been elevated so incredibly high, at the time after the tzaddik leaves this world, kol atzmi zoy shel tzaddik, this essence, this incredible dimension of the tzaddik, is completely available in all the worlds, including ours. Which is why we could receive from the tzaddik even more than we could have received while the tzaddik was living. So what is the histalkus of a tzaddik? The revealed aspects of the tzaddik are suspended so that the essence of the tzaddik can become available. With that we can understand the reason should be stalkus of Moshe merumezes dafke. She's stalkus of Moshe merumezes dafke. What is going to be the symbol of Moshe leaving this world? No name mentioned in the parasha. No name. What's a name? Your name is not your essence. Your name is what somebody calls you. Different people call you by different names. You have names of endearment, nicknames, formal names, personal names, Hebrew names. In the only reason we have a name is for the benefit of others, that somebody can identify you, they can call you, they can get your attention. Whereas a person of their own, as they are, you don't need a name. You'd be the same person with or without a name. And we can prove it. You see clearly. We give a baby a name after the baby is already a few days old. But the child, with all the faculties, all the abilities, the essence of the child, the soul of the child, all of that exists the minute the child is born, without a name. And even halachically, we know that from the day that a person is born, they are legally entitled to inherit. That means they're a true entity that has legal value, without a name. So your name does not connect to who you really are. You don't need a name. Your name is there for other people. But if somebody says you, then they're speaking to you, the real you, not the name of you. They're speaking to your essence. They're speaking to your overall being. We can extrapolate that to relate to Moshe. Moshe was given his name after he was born, sometime after he was born. In fact, in the case of Moshe, quite a long time after he was born. Especially when you consider the name Moshe was not given to him by his parents, but it was given to him by the daughter of Paroi, who met him when he was in the basket in the river, which is some 2 months or more after he was born. And she gave him the name Kivin Amayim Mishisi because she schlepped him out of the Nile waters. So the lack of the name of Moshe in Parashat Tetzaveh, where we address Moshe directly, Ve'ata, that speaks to the theme of Istalkus of a tzadik. When Moshe Rabbeinu, so to speak, passed away, Moshe Rabbeinu was elevated to his essence, which is beyond any name, beyond any description. That's why his name is not mentioned in the parasha that alludes to his istalkos, because he's now elevated beyond the name. He has no need for a name at that level. But in spite of the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu is so elevated, as we well know, the Gemara tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu is still servicing his role as the leader of the Jewish people all the time. But not only is he doing it, he's now doing it with his full essence, his full power, as he is at his highest level. So obviously Moshe is in the parasha. How is he in the parasha? In the second person, you instruct. Because he's truly present. His essence is present. The Moshe, as the Kli Yakar points out, Ve'ato means you in your core essence, Tetzaveh, either instruct or connect the Jewish people. So what's the message? The message is the lack of the name of Moshe tells you that you've got greater experience of the presence of Moshe at his essence, which is the istalkus of a tzadik. Now that has to reflect somehow in the entire parasha, not just in either the beginning line or those words that are said directly to Moshe. In a cave, the fact that the entire parasha omits Moshe's name, then implies that the entire parasha is linked to Moshe's essence, which is beyond his name and whatever the name might represent. We know that the primary theme and content of a parasha is always alluded to in the name of the parasha, as the Rebbe points out numerous times. So that this concept of Moshe's essence shining through, whereas the revealed aspects of Moshe are invisible, that has to be alluded to in the name of the parasha. Ashal pi minig Yisrael, which our minig is knitfas b'chomashim, and so it's printed in the chomashim. Shma'u Tetzaveh. Tetzaveh is going to be the clue to this entire principle. The essence of Moshe revealed, while the revelation of Moshe is invisible. What does that mean? So the Rebbe is going to bring up a very interesting point to introduce what Tetzaveh means, and that is when it's acceptable to use gematria as a means of learning Torah. We know that the 4 levels of how to learn Torah, Pshat, Remez, Drush, Soid. Remez is you're looking at things that are hinted at in the wording or the context of the psukim. And within the world of Remez, we look at gematria as a means of understanding concepts. There's certain Sfarim that focus primarily on gematria. Balaturim is very well known to us, and Megala Mukos does a similar thing, looking at the gematrias of words and linkages between words based on the gematria. You have to be very clear, and this is an incredibly important piece of information. It's not open season for every person to invent their own gematrias. And a gematria has to have an authentic Jewish basis. Now, if there are 2 words that share the same gematria, that still doesn't mean that they have some deep connection between them just because they have the same letter value. It's that when you have 2 words that convey the same core theme, then it is possible that theme might also express itself, but to simen vahichacha, with some kind of a symbol or some kind of an indication that this is a shared theme. How do you know it? Because it also shares the same gematria. This is also clear from what the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya about what gematria is. The Alter Rebbe there says that the gematria of a word tells us al-bechina acharoina, the so-called lowest dimension of what that word represents, which is basically the gematria is telling us how many different energies are incorporated in this particular word. In other words, kloimar. Gematria shava moira shtei atevus misber shava shel koiches aklulim ba'ir v'chayis shelahen. If 2 words share the same gematria, so 2 words have the gematria 48, that means that there's a combination of 48 different energies that are associated with that word. And that those 48 energies will speak to whatever enlivens the concept that word describes. Avon. אין בכך כדי ללמד שתוכן שהכויכה שבטבע אחס יש שייכות לתוכן הכויכה שבטבע השנייה. But this could have 48 energies, which are different to that word, which has 48 energies. It's not an automatic connection between the two words because they have the same number of energies. But when we already know that there is a thematic link between these two words, now I could say the fact that these two words are speaking about a similar theme and they share the same gematria. Now I know that they're obviously stemming from similar spiritual sources. And those sources are now incorporated, expressed within these two words. It's just that the nature of how that energy evolved and was contracted and reduced, the only visible, accessible part of that original energy that flowed into whatever this word represents, all that I can now detect is that all I can see is that it's represented by the same numbers. I don't necessarily understand what those numbers are, what they represent, how they're rated, etc. That's why they're two different words, even though they have the same gematria, because it's the same energy that's manifested in completely different ways. Okay, coming to our point. What is the gematria of Tetzaveh? It's fairly easy to work out. Besides the fact that it's an easy, obvious gematria that you can work out like this, we're going to explain this not because of the magic number, but because of the theme that Tetzaveh expresses, and we'll show how that theme relates to the gematria of the word, and that's why the gematria is important, not because it just works out nicely mathematically. The gematria of Tetzaveh is 501. Over Mispar, what's the significance? That number is Echad Ayoyser al Chamesh Meyos. It's one more than 500, and that one more than 500, within that, you can express the idea of the essence of something which is beyond the name, the expressed form of that thing. What does that mean? Let's think, what does 500 mean in Torah? People are familiar, the Gemara often uses the number 500, and it's often used actually as a number of exaggeration. Why the number 500? So the Medrash tells us that the Eibusha traveled a distance of 500 years in order to acquire a name for himself. What does that mean? 500 years. What does it mean? The Eibusha doesn't move, doesn't need to move. Mavur al-Kach explains, the span of existence, the whole Seder Shtalshlus from the highest to the lowest spiritual realities, can all be represented by the number 500. And the fact that the Eibusha, so to speak, travels 500 years, that allows the Eibusha to so-called acquire a name. What's that name? That allows the Eibusha to reveal himself. In other words, what's it telling? We've already said a name is not something you need for yourself. It's for the benefit of others. That means there's another entity that needs a name in order to call out to you and identify you. So the Eibusha is building a Seder Shtalshlus that will have the feeling of separation and independence from Hashem, and therefore they have to acknowledge Hashem's name. So saying that the Eibusha travels 500 years in order to have a name is basically saying that the Eibusha creates a reality represented by the number 500, and that reality has to acknowledge Hashem's name, Gilui of the Eibusha. But when you're talking about the number 501, now you're a notch above that reality of 500. That's referring to the oneness of Hashem, that the Eibusha is the only reality of existence. This is the reality of the Eibusha, the essence of the Eibusha, which is beyond the 500 years of so-called acquiring a name, which is beyond the whole structure of Seder Shtalshlus, beyond the whole concept of creating a possibility of entities that are going to are going to call out and refer to the Eibusha by his name. So very simply, 500 is the reality of an expressed version of godliness and therefore created reality, and therefore it's Hashem's name. 501 is what's beyond that, which is Hashem's essence that cannot be named. And that also links to another explanation that's brought in Sfarim, that the word Asher also has the value of 501. Because Asher is Milashon Oisher, Moira al Tainug. Asher is a word related to Oisher, which means satisfaction or happiness, and therefore is related to very deep pleasure, Tainug. She'uinen Hanale B'Yosef Ba'Adam, which is the deepest human experience. HaKosher Be'atzmi Yosei, a person's pleasure. We're not talking about the pleasure you get from food. We're talking about real pleasure, like the pleasure and satisfaction of fulfilling your dreams, or being able to make a meaningful contribution in the world, etc. That speaks to a person's essence. So, as the expression goes, there's nothing within the human experience that is higher than oinig, than pleasure. So you've got the Eibishter's reality, which is Seder Shtalshlus, represented by the number 500 and 501, representing Hashem's essence. You have a similar thing within the human experience. We know that Chazal tell us that the neshama has 5 names. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida. These 5 names, including Yechida, Einam Etzem HaNeshama, are not the essence of the neshama, because they're names. Elohim Shemus Belvad, Shenitnu Lo Le'etzem. These 5 descriptions of the neshama are names, which means they reveal each of them a specific dimension of the neshama, of this soul, this unnamed essence of the soul. Now we know that every number is expressed in its most complete form when it is multiplied by 100, because reality is a 10-faceted reality, the 10 spheres, and each of those spheres has within it 10. So therefore the ultimate number is the number 100. So every reality actually plays out in its most expressed form in 100 dimensions. Then if you want to express the most expanded, most elaborate, most complex version of the human soul, it's going to be represented by the number 500. 5 Shemos, each one of them comprised of 100 dimensions. But then you get to Tetzaveh, which is 501, a level beyond 500. Now 500 represents the fullest expression of the human experience. That's Meramas al Etzem HaNeshama Shelamayim Mechamisha Shemus Nikru La. That represents the essence of the neshama, which is beyond any part of the neshama that could be described, even if it's beyond what we could understand. So there you got it. Tetzaveh is linked to Etzem HaNeshama, which is our message that the Histalkos of a tzadik switches off the Giluyim of that tzadik's neshama and expresses the essence of that tzadik's neshama. So this concept, that the entire parasha represents the idea of the essence, which is completely beyond anything that could be shared or identified or named or experienced. Is also alluded to into how many psukim there are in the parasha, which you always look at the end of the parasha. We're told that there's kufalef michoel siman, that in this case there are 101 psukim, and the siman of 101 is malach michoel. Likutei Torah, the Alter Rebbe explains the difference between the symbolism of the number 100 and the number 101. That the number 100 represents the most expressed, developed form of Seder Shtalshlus for exactly the reason we've just identified, because Seder Shtalshlus is built on the 10 spheres, and each of the 10 spheres has 10 components, so therefore the most expressed, most developed, most full form of Seder Shtalshlus is 100. 101 is Al Chad V'Echad V'Lo. That's the dimension of oneness of the Eibusha, which is beyond anything that can be counted or calculated or understood. Or maybe Al Kach Medivei HaMaharsha B'Pirish Maimei Chazal, and in this context, the Alter Rebbe quotes the Maharsha about the well-known Gemara that tells us that you can never compare the person who reviews their learning 100 times, which was common in those days, versus the person who reviews 101 times. That the number 100 relates to the more revealed, accessible dimensions of the soul, nefesh ruach neshama. Whereas the person who goes the 101st time is now linking to the piece of himself that is godly, that is one with Hashem. So that illustrates that the significance of the number 101 compared to the number 100 is very much like the difference between 501 compared to 500. It's a step beyond, it's a step into the essence, it is a completely different reality. Now that we've illustrated that gematrias are not just willy-nilly and you don't just make gematrias because you feel like it, but it's because there has to be a deep, meaningful connection between whatever the gematria is supposed to represent in the two words. So now we can give another dimension to this idea of what Moshe's histalkos is all about. Which is expressed by the fact that in this parasha Moshe appears in his essence, not in the part of him that is limited to his name and what it represents. That is linked l'shem parasha Tetzaveh, to the name of the parasha Tetzaveh as well. As we've illustrated, that is not just a conceptual link, but it's a link that also expresses in the gematria, because both the gematria of the name of the parasha and the gematria of the psukim of the parasha both express the same concept, etzem, which is beyond gilui. Because the entire theme is Moshe Rabbeinu, the stalkos of a tzadik, and therefore Moshe is present in his essence, which is way beyond any level of gilui, of revealed experience. That is something that is not only shown by the message and theme of the parasha, but even by the gematria of the words of the parasha, because paradoxically, we said that gematria is where you've actually lost touch with what the thing is really about, and all you're seeing is the number relationship. So you're getting like the least, most downgraded version of divine revelation in the gematria. And that's the point. How do you know that you've touched the essence of something? It's when you are living in touch with the lowest, the most concealed, the most simplified version of something. And then, if you can also find the essence there, then you know you're dealing with the essence. Anything which has to be graded and depends on how aware I am, or spiritual I am, or learned I am, it's not the essence. The essence doesn't require me to fulfill certain criteria in order to express itself. So if I'm all the way down in gematria, which means I've watered down whatever the depth of that particular word is, just simply to the fact that it has numbers that match up with another number, that's the greatness of the etzem, that it can even be accessed in that point.